Originally released in 2007, Crysis took the gaming world by storm with unbelievable graphics that demanded performance beyond the capabilities of PC hardware of the era. The phrase, "can it run Crysis?" became the standard measurement unit to determine how badass your computer really was. To say 2007 was a stacked year in gaming is an understatement. It's one of the best years the game industry has ever had, with releases like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Halo 3, Super Mario Galaxy, The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, and even freaking Assassin's Creed and BioShock. But Crysis is more than just visual spectacle. In its best gameplay moments, it can even hold up to these other titles. Largely unaware of the hype surrounding Crysis at the time, I purchased this box copy here a year or so after the initial release of the game. As a massive fan of Halo and a budding PC gamer, the game's cover art and marketing material sold me on it. So when I returned home and popped the game's disc into my family's laptop, I unknowingly tasked it to the most difficult job it would ever undertake. Well, I can say that it ran Crysis, but not exactly well. The game's opening cutscene played out at maybe 10 frames per second, and if I made it past there, the game would frequently lock up and even crash. While the graphics were incredible, the thing that really began to captivate me was the gameplay, but due to technical issues, I never made it very far into the game. And as if to tease me further, included with the game was an Alienware marketing insert that made me believe I need a godlike gaming desktop to even run the game at playable frame rates. Years later, and on a new computer, I was finally able to play Crysis at a reasonable level of performance. The game is special to me not only because of these experiences, but also because of the map editor included with the game. For the first time, it felt like I could peer behind the veil and into the magic used to construct video games. I'd spend hours in the editor, building weird maps, and messing around with the game's physics system. I'd even go online and watch people push CryEngine 2 and their computers to the limit in videos like this amazing Crysis Mass Explosion one. It's because of games like Crysis that shipped with these tools that I took an interest in software and game development and would eventually go on to study computer science in university and actually work professionally as a computer graphics engineer. All these memories and many times I've returned to Crysis to see how well it runs on my latest computer make it legendary, but it wasn't until 2023 that I actually beat Crysis for the first time. Now, nearly every modern computer can run Crysis at playable frame rates, and even the aging Nintendo Switch received a port of the remaster. So the question is no longer, can it play Crysis, but instead, should I play Crysis? And I'd answer that with a resounding yes.
Maximum game.
Crysis is the spiritual successor to Far Cry, a series which is much more well known today. Both games are developed by the German game studio Crytek and crafted using their in-house game engine, CryEngine. While Far Cry was made with the initial version of CryEngine, the engine was improved to a version 2 over the course of many years and used for Crysis. It's apparent Crytek takes pride in their technology, as many titles that leverage their engine open with
achieved with CryEngine.
This is quite a statement, as plenty of other game engines just flash their logo and move on. Both Crysis and Far Cry were visual tour de forces at the time of their release and were designed with a wide linear approach. The term wide linear is one I've heard used by Alex Battaglia from Digital Foundry, and it perfectly describes the design here. With islands as a setting, the game's levels feel naturally constrained by the terrain. The opening several levels play out on the coastline, which gives players plenty to explore, but forests and rougher terrain keep them from adventuring too far inland. It's only in the latter half of the game where we move away from the coastline and further into linear environments. I'd liken the design of Crysis to a Halo campaign, mashed together with just a touch of immersive sim. The opening minutes of Crysis hold your hand quite tightly, but once it's done teaching you the basic mechanics, it sets you loose on the Lingshan Islands in a moment that evokes the same wonder and beauty the step-out moments from Bethesda games do. There's undeniable beauty and freedom cresting the hill right at sunrise, only to be greeted with a tropical wonderland. But beyond the visuals, this moment establishes the gameplay sandbox Crysis truly is. The clearest path at this point in the game's opening is taking out a small enemy base just below you and completing the game's first secondary objective. But how are you going to accomplish this first task? Well, stealth is always the great option, but you can also go in guns blazing and draw more enemies to your position. And then what's your next move from there? You can hug the shoreline and make your way to the next objective on the beach, you can steal a vehicle and charge your way through enemy lines, or you could grab a boat and get lost at sea before finding your way back to the game's main objective. This is the wide linear sandbox that Crysis provides and thrives in. I relate Crysis to an immersive sim, as there's often multiple pathways you can travel down on your way to the next objective. The game lets you play how you like, and the world is very interactive and rewards player awareness and experimentation. The environment is your friend in Crysis, and you want to make sure you use it to your advantage. Having familiarity with enemy vehicles helps too, as some can be taken out with a single well-placed shot. One of the tools that allows for playstyle diversity is the nanosuit. The nanosuit is the icon of the Crysis series, and I think it looks cool as hell. It's plastered all over the game's covers and every bit of marketing material associated with them. Composed from a tight weave of muscle-like fibers bound together by a metal skeleton, the nanosuit feels much more organic than the typical metal plate power armor you'd see Master Chief or Doom Guy rocking. The design feels closer to biomechanical armor you'd see in an anime like Guyver. While the nanosuit makes its wearer incredibly powerful and versatile in combat, it doesn't quite transform them into an unstoppable one-man army, in the first game at least. While you can waste groups of enemies quickly, if you're not careful, they can also drop you in seconds. Master Chief's Mjolnir armor makes him a walking tank. The nanosuit in the original Crysis makes you more like the world's greatest Spec Ops soldier. You're deep in enemy territory and there's some weird shit happening on this island, so it's best to scout out enemy encampments and pick your fights using this intel. It's a bit ironic how fast enemies can kill you, as in the opening cutscene of the game, it shows you what a badass the nanosuit makes you, with a trailer highlighting the suit's functions. All sense of this overwhelming power is taken away within the first 10 minutes of the game, as a mysterious alien force just begins to annihilate your squad of super soldiers. This feeling of security is only reduced further when a few hours into the game, it's revealed that the North Korean enemies had developed nanosuits of their own. I can understand this, as the designers clearly had to make enemies that'd be interesting to fight, and none of this takes away from the flexibility the nanosuit provides in the form of its 4 modes: armor, power, speed, and cloak. Players can swap between each mode on the fly, but they drain the same energy meter. Crysis 2, 3, and the remaster of the original would go on to streamline the nanosuit modes. Thankfully, a patch reintroduced the classic suit control to the remaster, as I don't think it feels right without it. On a controller, the classic suit mode swapping does feel cumbersome, but I played through Crysis on the PC, and the original suit control just feels so much more in tune with the freedom that Crysis is designed around. With this streamlined rendition, there's actually some functionality of the suit that's altered and features that are lost. Armor mode has to be engaged manually by pressing a key, and once it's being used, it will continually drain energy, which is very different from the original release of the game. Speed mode is also engaged by sprinting, which is infuriating because you can't have armor mode up and sprint at the same time, or be in cloak and sprint. I really find it frustrating that you have to sprint to use speed mode and can't just use it all the time, because there's more than one occasion where I'd go prone and use speed mode to go faster. And that's just not an option in the remaster when using the new suit controls. That's enough ranting about the classic suit control versus streamlined version for now, but in the later entries, they're designed for the streamlined version from the ground up, so I do think it works better there. The default mode I leave my suit in is armor mode. It protects you from incoming fire, and you never know when you're going to catch some stray bullets. Armor mode doesn't really do anything beyond that, and it doesn't expend any energy besides when taking incoming fire. Strength mode does as it says and makes the player stronger. You can pick things up and throw them further, you can grab enemies and throw them through buildings. Additionally, strength mode also lets your melee attacks hit harder and lets players jump higher, which is really useful for getting into good positions. After that, we have speed mode, which speeds the player up. When you sprint using speed mode, you burn energy very quickly, but you move at incredible speeds. And like I mentioned earlier, you can also crouch and go prone with speed mode while retaining the speed bonus. While you're prone, you can also hold shift and sprint. It'll still burn a ton of energy, but you'll go really fast, and I always feel like a snake going 100 miles per hour when I do this. In speed mode, even the base move speed feels faster than the sprint in other modes. Speed mode is great, but sometimes you'll accidentally bump into geometry and hurt yourself, or you might even run up on enemies too fast and get shot down while you have no armor up. For Crysis 2 and 3, strength and speed mode were combined into power mode, which enhances all aspects of the user's musculature and makes sense. And finally, there's the cloak mode, which will constantly burn energy. It'll burn it at faster rates when moving, and if you shoot at all, it'll take the cloak off completely. Cloak mode's a great way to scout out enemy encampments, and in many cases you can just slip right past the enemy and not even fight them. There's also plenty of firefights that I was in where I almost completely ran out of health and just had to go to cloak mode for a second to heal back up. With all these modes at the player's disposal, you're sure to find the style that fits you like a glove. Personally, I like taking enemies out from a distance using sniping and stealth, and then moving in with a few stragglers left and going out guns blazing. Using the nanosuit makes me feel like a predator. from the Predator movies. You're hyper lethal from the shadows and against small groups of enemies. The nanosuit isn't the only tool in your kit that's highly customizable and equipped to deal with a wide variety of situations. Almost every gun in Crysis features multiple points of customization that allow you to modify them on the fly. The most common assault rifle in the game is the FY-71, but it's also the weapon that features the most variety of attachments. It can be outfitted for all-out assault, but if you want to stick to a stealthier approach, it can just as easily be set up as a silenced, scoped weapon. On top of the attachments, weapons often feature two firing modes that can be switched between with the press of a button. Semi-automatic is perfect for weapon control, while automatic can provide the extra firepower you may need in hectic situations. The underbarrel attachments can also be swapped to with the same key and come in a variety of flavors. Several weapons also have unique firing modes, with the pistol featuring a burst fire mode, and when wielding two pistols and using this mode, it can really mow down enemies. The shotgun also features a wide and narrow pellet spread option, which helps it adapt to the situation at hand. The seamless nature of customization in Crysis keeps players engaged in a state of flow while encouraging playstyle experimentation. Many games have players set up their loadouts, weapon attachments, and everything on a menu before loading into the actual level. Crysis just lets you tinker with all this in an immersive fashion that never really takes you out of the experience. There's no waiting around for a level to end or scouting around for a weapon bench to change your attachments. If something doesn't work for you or the situation calls for something different, you can just change your nanosuit's mode and your weapon's features in a few seconds. Don't get me wrong, I also enjoy games that make you pick and commit to a playstyle, but with the sandbox nature of Crysis, the emphasis on flexibility works perfectly. Keeping with the spirit of experimentation, the assortment of weapons never feels old as new attachments and guns are introduced throughout the campaign. It's only in the second half of the game that you'll actually battle the aliens known as the Ceph, and at that point, powerful weapons like the Gauss rifle and attachments like incendiary ammo are introduced. The Ceph are much more durable and aggressive than typical human soldiers and require this upgraded arsenal to deal with. Despite the player being clad in bleeding edge tactical armor, Crysis manages to maintain a very real sense of physicality. Scoped weapons aren't 100% accurate laser beams, all of them feature a significant degree of sway that must be accounted for when taking shots, and as a result, lining up perfect long distance headshots feels very rewarding. One of the most grounding features of Crysis is its physics and the fact many small objects can be picked up, thrown around, and interacted with. This lends to the feeling of items being real objects in the world and not just set dressing that's nailed down. The game goes even further with animals that inhabit the island and help it make it feel like more than just a war zone. The realistic nature of Crysis extends to its weather. When the Ceph finally awaken, they freeze the island, and I had to make some actual gameplay changes in response to the cold temperatures. In particular, the holographic sight freezes over, making it much harder to see through. This just led me to use iron sights instead in the frozen environments, but I was impressed with the attention to detail here. Difficulty in Crysis is another interesting subject. While difficulty is often associated with having enemies hit harder and take more bullets, here higher difficulty levels are also more realistic. The two lower difficulty settings offer players assistance by highlighting attacking enemies, having them speak English, and offering binoculars that are easier to use. On hard, the difficulty I played on, the enemy highlighting is dropped, and binoculars become harder to use. Finally, Delta offers the most immersive experience, with enemies speaking exclusively in Korean, and disabling other helpful functions like crosshairs and grenade warnings. Another key difference is on the lower two difficulties, players can fire mounted weapons while they drive. On Hard and Delta, players are forced to change seats in order to operate mounted turrets. While my favorite aspects of Crysis are its grand sandbox and wide linear design, the entire second half of the campaign narrows the scope of the levels and places the emphasis on action. After awakening the Ceph, there's nearly zero combat with human enemies for the remainder of the campaign. Fighting Ceph is much more direct, as they tend to soak more bullets than the North Korean soldiers, so stealth becomes a less attractive option. Outside the shift to more linear, set-piece driven levels, there's also two vehicle-centric missions with Onslaught and the infamous Ascension level, with the former focusing on tank combat and the latter aerial combat. Ascension was notorious for pushing PCs to their breaking point, and was not included in the Xbox 360 and PS3 release of the game, likely due to technical constraints. The mission was also not initially shipped with the remaster of Crysis and was only added back in after several patches. From wide open lush shorelines to linear frozen roads and even zero gravity alien spaceship interiors, the variety of missions within Crysis makes the game feel like a technical showcase, demonstrating the capability and flexibility of CryEngine 2. If a prospective customer looking to license CryEngine 2 saw it was used to build Crysis, then surely it could be used to build nearly anything else. While CryEngine hasn't been as widely adopted as Unreal Engine, Epic Games works in a similar fashion with their game releases. Gears of War was always the showcase for all the latest features of Unreal Engine 3, and Fortnite, despite its simplistic art style, is usually the first product on the market displaying the cutting-edge features from Unreal Engine 5 like Lumen and Nanite. For all the things I love about Crysis, the story isn't one of them. It's serviceable enough and laid the groundwork for 3 other games, several books, and a short comic series. Crysis 2 was the moment the franchise shifted away from the sandbox and more towards a Hollywood sci-fi epic, where greater emphasis was also placed on the story. The setup for the first entry is Raptor Team, a squad of US Special Forces soldiers equipped with the latest and greatest military tech, are sent to investigate a distress call from a group of archaeologists on the Lingshan Islands. These are a fictional group of islands located near the Philippines. The distress signal is sent by Helena Rosenthal and states they've discovered something that could change the course of human history, but have been taken hostage by the Korean People's Army, also known as the KPA.
This is Dr. Helena Rosenthal of the IAS research team stationed on the Lingshan Islands. The North Koreans have assumed control. They're rounding up civilians outside. We found something buried in the rock. This discovery could change the future of the planet.
Players inhabit Nomad, who's about as boring as video game playable characters come.
Hey Nomad, you still with us?
He's not a silent protagonist, but doesn't exactly have many lines either. During the intro cutscene, we're introduced to Prophet, the team leader, and Psycho, who loves to crack jokes.
The North Koreans can't know we're here.
I won't even know what hit them.
Can it, Psycho? Pay attention.
These two are vastly more interesting than Nomad. Crytek surely felt the same way, as Prophet and Psycho would go on to be featured or star in every other Crysis game, while Nomad doesn't appear in the later video games at all. Just as Raptor Team makes their descent towards the island, everything goes wrong when Nomad's parachute is mysteriously taken out. Things only get worse as the group is scattered, and in their attempt to regroup, they mysteriously begin to be picked off. Whatever force is taking them out is also killing off North Korean soldiers, and doing so in a particularly brutal fashion. This, combined with the unexplainable phenomena the team encounters, leads to Psycho demanding answers from Prophet, who assures Psycho he's giving them all the information he possibly can.
It's located.
How can you be sure?
I'm not, but it's all we've got to go on. We need to get moving.
I'm not going anywhere until you give me some answers. I'm not buying that locate and evacuate bullshit anymore.
Yeah. Since when do the North Koreans have themselves a motherfucking freeze ray?
Damn straight! I feel like I jumped into a bloody comic book here.
I've told you everything you need to know.
That's bollocks and you know it. Aztec is dead and we ain't got the first idea what killed him.
The campaign does present some enjoyable set-piece moments during the opening, and I would be lying if I said seeing a frozen boat in the middle of the forest didn't make me wonder what the hell was going on. The mystery of what is attacking Raptor Team and causing these occurrences is strong enough to drive the plot forward. However, before tangling with aliens, the North Korean army must be dealt with first. From the opening to just over the halfway point, players will cut their way up and through the ranks of the North Korean army before reaching Helena Rosenthal, who is being directed by General Ri Chong-kyung of the KPA. At this point, Raptor Team is down to 2 members as Jester and Aztec were killed, and Prophet was grabbed by a Ceph and has been MIA since. Hungry for power, General Kyung believes the artifact located under the island holds unlimited potential and forces Rosenthal to open it. This leads to the collapse of the rocky outcrop at the center of the island and forces Nomad to battle and kill General Kyung while helping Rosenthal escape. As rocks seal Nomad's exit, players are forced to journey through the opening in the massive artifact in the hopes of finding another way out. This places Nomad directly inside a massive Ceph structure, and the entirety of the game's 7th level, Core, is spent in zero gravity looking for a way out. This level is disorienting, but linear enough that I didn't get too lost finding an exit. Nomad leaves a great first impression on the Ceph by dusting every single one of them he encounters during his time inside their home. Up to this point, players have only seen glimpses of the Ceph, and always while they were clad in their robotic exoskeletons. Here we get a closer look at how Ceph operate and their true gelatinous bodies. While trapped inside, Nomad's wireless connection to the outside is cut off, but he still manages to record his entire experience so he can inform the US military about the alien structure. When Nomad finally escapes the Seth temple, it lets out a massive wave of energy that freezes the island to make it more hospitable for them. It doesn't take long to play through the rest of the game from here, as the remaining 4 missions are all heavily action focused and linear. As players battle their way to rendezvous with fellow soldiers, they run back into Prophet, who somehow re-emerged and managed to operate a Seth weapon.
Let's get the ugly bastards a taste of their own. You with me, son?
Hell yeah!
Prophet acts quite strangely for the rest of the game, and this carries over into the setup for Crysis 2. After fighting an onslaught of Seth, Nomad and Prophet both find temporary safety aboard the USS Constitution aircraft carrier, where they reunite with Psycho and Helena Rosenthal. Having received the footage Nomad captured while inside the Seth temple, Admiral Morrison of the USS Constitution is authorized by the Pentagon to use nuclear force against the Seth.
You did a fine job out there, son. Thanks to your video feed, the Joint Chiefs have recommended a nuclear assault. As soon as I get final confirmation from the White House, we'll reduce these bastards to dust.
Admiral, we shouldn't rush into any decisions here. We need time to explore other alternatives.
You want to second-guess the President? The Joint Chiefs? I'm not sure you understand the gravity of the situation, Doctor.
The reunion with Prophet is short-lived as he claims Morrison's nuke won't damage the Seth and he needs to go back and finish the job himself. Just as Prophet flies back towards the island, Morrison decides it's time to drop the nuke.
Sir, we've got multiple contacts inbound. 8, no, 12. Oh, shit! Everybody down!
Unfortunately, just like Rosenthal feared, the nuke had little effect, and if anything, it just made the massive frozen sphere encompassing the island more powerful. Having pissed off the Seth, they launch an all-out assault on the Constitution, killing Admiral Morrison and doing massive damage to the ship. As one of the last men standing, Nomad battles his way through the attacking aliens, where he's faced by a Seth hunter and warship. Armed with a handheld tactical nuke launcher and with the assistance of Psycho and Rosenthal, Nomad manages to bring down the warship. As the Constitution and Seth warship begin to submerge, Nomad jumps onto a VTOL carrying Psycho and Rosenthal. The game ends as Psycho pilots the VTOL back towards the island, where the group intends to search for Prophet.
I'm picking up a transmission.
What is it?
You ain't gonna believe this, mate. It's Prophet.
He's alive?
Can't kick him by the sound of it. Looks like he's inside the sphere.
Lock onto his position. Going back.
In total, players can expect a 10-hour experience with the campaign, and I feel that's a solid runtime. Any longer in the game would have begun to overstay its welcome. There's a several-year gap in the lore between the end of Crysis and the beginning of Crysis 2. If you're curious about what happens in that time frame, the comic series helps explain the events after the first game's ending. For this video, I played through the original release of Crysis, but I was plagued by technical issues, primarily visual artifacting and dozens of game crashes. During the battle against the Hunter in the final mission, my game must have crashed at least 7 times. I'm not running the completely vanilla version of the game either. For my playthrough, I had 2 fixes installed to help get the game running in a reasonable state. Your mileage for technical problems may vary depending on your PC hardware, but I'm rocking a 7950X3D as my CPU, which may have made the experience a bit rougher. Of all the fixes on offer, I would consider the C1 launcher, which patches the game's executables, nearly essential. With the latest Nvidia drivers, I couldn't even get an unmodded version of Crysis to boot successfully. Luckily, just as I was running into this graphics driver issue, the developer for C1 put out a new release which addressed it. Although Crysis was originally constrained to its singular release on PC, many versions of the game have been released since then. Unexpectedly, the Xbox 360 and PS3 managed to receive ports of Crysis in October of 2011, just a few months after the launch of Crysis 2. Crysis 2 was built with the third generation of CryEngine, which was built with console deployment in mind. As a result, the console version of Crysis swapped from CryEngine 2 and up to 3. Comparing the 7th gen console releases to the original, its clear graphical compromises had to be made, but it's still impressive that they managed to get the game running on those consoles at all, as they were already nearly 6 years old at that point. If you have Xbox Game Pass, you can still download this version of Crysis today and play it on Xbox One or Xbox Series hardware. The footage you've seen here of the Xbox 360 version is running on my Xbox Series X, which I believe runs it at a much more consistent frame rate than you would have seen on the original consoles it was intended for. Fast forwarding to 2020, it was announced that Crysis would be receiving a remaster for the PC, Xbox One, PS4, and Nintendo Switch. The remaster was based on the Xbox 360 and PS3 port and utilized a modified version of CryEngine 3. At launch, it was disappointing, as it was held back by a lack of features and brutal performance issues even on top-end hardware. This included a lack of upscaling techniques like DLSS and intense single-threaded performance demands. It took several months, but the remaster did end up in better shape. It received further performance optimizations, support for DLSS, enhanced ray tracing features, and even brought back the Ascension mission that had been cut from the Xbox 360 and PS3 port. Later, the game was updated for the PS5 and Xbox Series hardware to better support the latest consoles. If I were to play Crysis again today, purely for the fun of it, it would be on the PC version of the remaster. Now, the remaster runs well enough and looks damn impressive with all the settings maxed out. There are just too many technical issues with the original release for me to recommend it to everyone unless you're willing to modify some files and still deal with potential crashing anyway. Eagle-eyed Crysis fans might have noticed I did slip in some remastered gameplay footage earlier in the video, but I really tried to just stick to the original there and use footage of my playthrough from the remaster here. Even 16 years after it was released, Crysis is still quite the looker, and the gameplay is as enjoyable as ever. On Virtual Legacy, I like to rank games on my tier list after I cover them. Crysis earns its spot as the first game on my A tier. I do have a lot of nostalgia for it that might have helped boost the score a bit, but this is my personal list and not totally objective. Still, I think Crysis is a great game and everybody should go out and play it at least one time. I'm looking forward to playing and covering the other Crysis games, as I've never played Warhead or all the way through 3, but have fond memories of Crysis 2. If you have any stories from your experience with the original release of Crysis, maybe destroying your family's computer, I'd love to hear them in the comments section down below. Thanks for taking this walk down memory lane with me, and if you want more content just like this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, it really helps. Till then, I'll see you around and have a good one.